Hello, and welcome to the Open Loop podcast, a youth led space for deep curiosity driven conversations exploring the ideas, technologies, and systems shaping our past, present, and future. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Youth Action Now, the Canada Service Corps, and the Social Planning Council of Ottawa for supporting this project and believing in our vision. For today's episode, I'm speaking with Kyra, a student athlete and aspiring diplomat whose path weaves together sports, global affairs, and the art of building meaningful networks. So, hi, Kyra, and thank you for being here today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. It's great to be on here and to talk about my experience and give some advice. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. First thing first, from our conversations before, you've shared that you've received D2 offers for soccer in when applying, and you're heading to uOttawa for social sciences this fall. Can you take us through that journey and how sports and diplomacy ended up on the same path for you?
Yeah, of course. So, just to give some context to your listeners, I grew up playing both gymnastics and soccer in Ottawa, and I'm headed to uOttawa for political science, where I'll be doing a minor in conflict studies and human rights. And I'm also part of the co-op program of that undergraduate degree. And so, when it comes to diplomacy and sports, I think it's important to notice and to recognize that there's a correlation between both. And so when you think of sports, skills such as teamwork, communication, and perseverance are built over the years. And in diplomacy, those skills can be translated to negotiations and to treaties. These skills are easily transferable from one space to the other. And so I would say that diplomacy was really an easy decision for me. I had an interest in politics from starting like when I was in high school. And I didn't want to be a politician, but I did have a keen interest in international relations. And given my past in sports, like I mentioned, a lot of skills can transfer to diplomacy. And so that's really where it's really the degree and the path I decided to choose.
Beautiful. And could you elaborate a bit more on what that intersection between being a high performing athlete and someone interested in global affairs looks like? What do people misunderstand or fail to think about, I guess, in that aspect?
And building on the previous question, I think a lot of people fail to recognize the similarities between both. And so, as an athlete, you're performing in a high pressure environment, whether it's in front of coaches, parents, recruiters, especially during the recruiting process. You face a lot of scrutiny. Every pass, every shot, every decision, every sprint is heavily scrutinized, right? Because it tells who you are as a person, as an athlete. And that scrutiny can be translated to, like I mentioned, diplomacy. I mean, like I was kind of saying, every negotiation, every treaty, every domestic decision can be heavily scrutinized by foreign nations. And I mean, if you take a look at geopolitics and history, like diving into those subjects, you can really see like the importance. And so I would say that people don't understand the correlation. And I'm really surprised that not more athletes go into diplomacy and politics because there's a lot of transferable skills. Obviously, you can build those skills, but if you already have them, why not go into a profession where those skills are needed, right? And so I would say that's something that a lot of people misunderstand.
For sure. I guess we could start with like focusing on the athlete aspect for a bit before circling back to the social science and humanities aspect. But I guess could you share a bit on how your self perception or how your sense of identity was shaped by being an athlete? So physically, mentally, socially, academically. How how did like Kyra from when she was really young and she just started sports to now evolve through sports?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So sports, I'd say, has always been part of my identity and still is to a certain extent today. Academically, there is no question that you had to keep your grades up, whether you're like a recreational athlete or whether you're a high performing athlete. There's always a clear intersection between academics and athletics. and I'm sure it'll be a very common topic of discussion today. And so academically, there was always the pressure to keep your grades up. I know that certain coaches would impose like a minimum in terms of like if you don't keep your grades at a certain level, you're not getting playing time, you're not performing. And I mean, it's more common when you move up in skills and leagues and levels, but I think that was consistent across the board. Socially, I would say a lot of my friends were athletes. When you're training like at your peak 25 hours a week, your teammates become your friends and then your friends become your family, right? And so I think at my peak at the age of 12, I was doing around 16 hours of gymnastics per week. So 4 sessions of 4 hours. And so when you spend that much time with your teammates, they quickly become friends. And so I'd say that was my social life. It was just I was friends with athletes. And then you said mentally. Um, mentally, I would say that it definitely teaches you grit. Gymnastics is a very disciplined sport. You aim for perfection, and in a lot of things, it's very hard to achieve. I mean, nowadays in gymnastics scoring, you can't reach perfection. It's just highest score. But in youth leagues, it's really you aim for a 10. So one being like horrible and 10 being perfect. And so like 9.1, 9.5, you kind of want to aim up there. So I'd say it's a very big part of my identity growing up. And because it was such a big part of my life as a kid, it will always remain that way. And I hope that answers some of your, I hope that answers your question.
No, that answers it perfectly. Thank you. Um, I guess I'm gonna dive even a little deeper into like how sport impacted your resilience and leadership. So, can you share some examples or instances where in other areas of life where you actively think in sports, this is what happens, and I think that's applicable to this situation. Can you share situations like that?
Yeah, like the correlation between leadership in athletics and like outside settings. Yeah,
Yes.
okay, for sure. So leadership in sports was seen a lot through communication. And so as a team, especially on the women's side, harmony is really, really important because I mean, girls in sports tend to care more about the small things than the larger issues, which I've heard like numerous coaches say. I've asked coaches, oh, do you prefer coaching men's, women's? And there's pros and cons to both. In terms of leadership, I learned personally that the way you communicate is more important than what you say. And so your tone, the way you speak, the way you communicate, do you emphasize or not? Do you understand their point of view? In sports, that can be very important because, I mean, on and off the field, things can be like misinterpreted and miscommunicated sometimes. And I've seen it firsthand where captains sometimes make mistakes and it throws off the harmony within the team. And so I'd say that can apply a lot to leadership in other settings, whether that's academic or whether that's like a professional setting, how you communicate, when you communicate, everything regarding communication. My perspective is really important. And so what's your tone of voice when you talk with the new member onboarding your team, right? How do you go about communicating with them? How do you set the standards? And so when it comes to leadership, I'd say communication is number one. And then on your second topic of resilience, there's no question about it that sport teaches resilience depending on your coach and your athletic experiences. Obviously, the degree of resilience that you develop varies, but I'd say it's definitely something that's developed across the board in all sports. You learn to show up when you don't want to, you learn to develop skills even though you might not be in the right mindset. And so part of resilience is just like not having a choice. I mean, I would say you're very resilient person, Lena. I mean, you're very disciplined when it comes to your studies. Like, what would you add?
I'm still working on resilience a lot in my personal life. I haven't been great at it the past couple of years, but yeah, I think you mentioned some really important points in terms of I can see how that correlation happens. I think that's actually a very good skill to learn, and I actually would say that we're struggling with it. Me personally, if I'm struggling with something or if I don't feel like doing something, I'll just take a mental health day and quit until further notice. which sometimes is not the best approach. Let's just leave it at that. But I guess speaking of like the gender dynamics in sports, I know we've talked about this before on our last call and such, but there's a gap. Girls are not as encouraged to do sports as boys. And personally, I've been cut off from sports as well since the pandemic started. So I was doing a bunch of sports, pandemic happened. I was suddenly a teenager. I just never had that push to go back to it. There was no, it wasn't, I don't think a lot of my friends are doing sports. Whereas I know my brother and his friends are all usually at the gym, playing soccer, all that stuff. So I guess what do you have to say about that? Like, how do you think sports can empower girls, and especially in high school environments? And how can we encourage them to take up space in sports, especially as they go into this transitional phase where it's not as comfortable to play sports?
Of course, like you mentioned, we did talk about it, and something that I'll tell your listeners was a lot of women drop sports at the age of 16. I think that's the age that a lot of studies show. And so around like two-thirds with their sports, whether that's loss of interest, whether that's interest in like now like working or other passions or more preoccupations in life. So a lot of girls drop at the age of 16, and that's like right about middle way through high school. And as we've talked about, so like physical exercise, like the class, and sorry, I'm also French, so they call it education physique in French. That
Mhm.
class is dropped after ninth grade. Like it's no longer an obligation. And so it's easy for those who are interested in sports, especially women, to drop that class, right? And then that's kind of where you lose exposure to different sports. I personally also did the physical education class in grade 11 because I wanted to continue, and then I dropped it in um, grade 12 because I wanted to focus on other things. I wanted to focus on my academics, and because sports outside of school was increasing. So I'd say that sports is really important for empowerment when it comes to self-confidence, when it comes to increasing skill set, finding new passions. It helps a lot with teamwork, like we've a little bit mentioned. So I think it's important to continue encouraging women to play sports through high school, even though they might have other priorities. Now, there's so many different sports that, like we've talked about, whether it's from walking to running, like to soccer to gymnastics, like as long as you're moving, I think this is really important. I hope that answers a little bit your question.
No, for sure. I think you provided some very educated responses. So I liked how you included some stats and all. But yeah, I think for in my experience in high school, there was a lot of like gym class was only mandatory in grade 9 for the French immersion students. It was also required in grade 10, but then afterwards most will drop it. I found gym class very uncomfortable because you didn't have time to shower after, and it was just like, yeah, you get dressed and then you have to go back all sweaty and stinky to school, to class, to other classes, which I struggled with. And yeah, I think for me that was part of like sweat and discomfort, physical discomfort, kind of like pushed me away. But yeah, I guess I did have a follow-up question though about like sport careers and such. So you were on a competitive path, right? And I guess I'm curious. So any athlete is at risk of injury, possibly career-ending injury, in the sense of like you could be working or you could be practicing sport for a decade, 2 decades, and then get an injury, and for your physical health and for your well-being, you can't continue your career, or you have to either stop practicing for a while, or you can't practice competitively anymore. How how do you as an athlete cope with that? Or have you had any friends who went through that? Or what does it feel like knowing that? Like, yeah, I guess I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a topic I could talk about for days, for sure. Just to add something quick to what you mentioned about like uncomfortability, like for women or at school in a school setting, I would say that's very common. I mean, I don't know how I how I ran 5 kilometers and went back to class all sweaty, but we did what we had to at the time. And I would definitely make some modifications to that. I encourage most gym classes to be in the morning or near the end of the day. I know that midday was my least favorite when I was in high school, but my passion for sports kind of pushed me to keep on going. I would also, so you did mention some like uncomfortability and some like discomfort. When it came to sports, our school offered a women's only phys ed class. Did your school do that?
Yeah, thankfully, I think I'd actually struggle like hit rock bottom if I didn't have girls only gym class.
Yeah, so I think that helped a lot. Our school had introduced it in the past couple years, and like most women actually only did the women's only phys ed class because with the men, it could be pretty intimidating for those who haven't played sports their whole life. And I find boys are notoriously not accepting of like women who aren't as good as them in their sports. There's less acceptance and openness to learning from guys on that side, which I wish is something we could change.
To be
I,
honest, I would even add that it's not even always like genuine, them like the guys being mean, but it's also the perceived aspect of it. Like, because most girls at some point in their life were probably made fun of or had negative experiences playing sports with guys. At some point, there's like this internalized fear or intimidation that even if the group of guys in question or your classmates are wonderful, then you're still internalizing that fear and you'd rather like not deal with it.
Yeah, of course. And there's a certain expectation that like there's going to be some competition between guys and girls. And even as someone who did excel at most like school sports, I did tons of things. I did badminton, soccer, volleyball, tried some basketball for a bit, so I did all these sports and it was still intimidating as someone who was relatively good at them compared to my peers. And so I can't imagine what it was like for women who like hadn't done the sport before, hadn't even played, didn't even know the rules. Like I can't imagine what it was like. And for those women, it's probably very easy to not stereotypes, but have certain expectations going into playing sports, guys, and knowing that you're most likely not going to receive a positive response. Girls tend to be more accepting of other girls learning versus guys accepting of girls just in general. So that's kind of my comments on that topic. Your question. Sorry, can you just repeat what you had originally asked? It was linked to injuries, right?
Yeah, on career-ending injuries, what is it like dealing with the knowing that or knowing that you could lose a lot of that hard work over years and years, compounding by like if something goes wrong? What's it like?
Yeah, of course. I know of multiple people who have suffered like career-altering injuries, and it's really unfortunate. It's devastating to the athlete. Unfortunately, I believe so. I'd have to look into it, but scholarships are affected when it comes with injuries. I personally have a friend who dislocated her shoulder and she was out for a year, and that was during the year that you generally do recruiting. And so that was really tough on her. I There's a lot of women actually studies show that there's a lot of women who tear their ACL. I know of a couple who have, right? And so like first year going to university, she goes to uOttawa and she tore, I believe it's her ACL or it could have been her MCL, but either way, it's devastating, right? Especially all that hard work. When you want to get into competitive schools, I mean, you're dedicating every day on the field. That's kind of the expectation, right? So I'd say coping with injuries, it's very difficult, mentally, academically as well, athletically, socially, even, right? Like you're not with your team as much, you're not participating in drills. I personally suffered 4 ankle injuries within the span of 18 months. My sports medicine doctor was very familiar with me, but I'll just say, yeah, they're I want to say I don't want to say life changing because it's a little dramatic, but at the time of the injury, it's absolutely devastating. Mm, It's not the pain in itself, but I'd say more it's the consequences that follow an injury, right?
For sure. I think yeah, I've heard a few stories about like athletes who've had their life derailed. I think one recurring theme with injuries in athletes is that like typically athletes who are super dedicated to their sport will usually base a lot of their identity around the sport. And as you mentioned, like your school plans, your post-secondary plans are all like based on or dependent on you excelling at the sport. So like, would you say that, would you say that it's necessary to offer support to athletes such that like your sport is not your whole identity? Like, do you think it's just an individual journey? Do you think there needs to be support offered on that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do agree with your statement about offering support. I think that's key. So mental health support, I mean, there's no question about it. There's a goalkeeper in the United States who was playing, I think, either D1 or D2. And she unfortunately took her life about, I want to say, a couple years ago. And that really sparked a conversation of mental health resources and support toward athletes. Because the training can be pretty grueling. I mean, I can see it. There's unfortunately there's been issues of like the development of like medical conditions from overtraining, like they call it rhabdo, I think. And so that can be pretty bad when it comes to overtraining. There's no question about it that that it can definitely what's going to shape your self-worth. I know that as a gymnast, I mean, you're always aiming for that perfect 10, and it's not always possible, right? When you're scrutinized by every little decision or mistake, it can become very difficult mentally. And there's a direct correlation between mental health and physical health. So I, I'd say there's no doubt about it that we should be offering more support to our athletes, especially our athletes.
For sure. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think there is some great work already offered in there. There was a former hockey player who's now a startup founder, I believe, in Ottawa, who has like a an interesting story to share on injuries and athletics and such. But his journey really inspired his work. And then there's Manok Lual, who's also in Ottawa. He runs a basketball series of basketball programs right now, but he's also had these are two athletes that I know personally that have had to replan life after their athletic adventures, careers. Um,
Yeah, of course. It can be pretty difficult, and I pray that you don't suffer from any injuries from sports or none of the listeners do.
I hope so. Yeah, I think I would like to move on a bit to diplomacy and
Yeah, of
international
course.
affairs. Your interest in that. So
Yeah, of course.
currently, you've got your eye on a career in diplomacy or foreign affairs or international relations, and you're learning German. So could you share a bit more about what inspired that or what drew you to that in the first place?
Yeah, of course. So, like you mentioned, I am interested in international relations. I ultimately decided to go with political science because, in my opinion, it offers a more broad view of political institutions. And then from there, I can specialize in international relations. I would say that my interest stems from my skills from my sports. So I learned how important communication was, strategic communication, efficient communication. And when I think of an area in politics that requires that specifically, I think of diplomacy. For example, I mean, there's examples through history. I can't think of any on the top of my head, but examples where communication was was not properly executed and there were mistakes, right? And so, like, think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, actually. That was a mistake when it came to communication, right? And so I'd say that it's kind of everything. And I mean, that like, steered me towards my path to diplomacy. That's really where my interest stemmed from. And then when it came to learning German, I mean, we've talked about language learning, how important it is. Um, and I mean, we talked a little bit about Arabic and the complications that came with the Arabic language, which is pretty complex, I'd say, for someone who's not native. But I'd say language learning is a key pillar to diplomacy, no question about it. And it facilitates bilateral exchanges and I mean, to be able to speak multiple languages is an insane asset. So that's where I decided to pick up a language. Now, the question is, what language? So I have some cultural and like heritage ties to Europe. And so I decided to pick up German because it's the first language I'd say apart from English and French that is linked to a lot of European institutions. It's a pretty, I'd say it's common language in Europe, and I decided to pick it up. I mean, I might pick up some more languages in the future, but for now, I really wanted to start there.
Good luck with that. Yeah, German is tough, but you got this.
I
I
mean,
believe
Arabic
in
is
you.
tougher. We were talking about it, huh?
Um, it's a struggle for native speakers too, unfortunately. Or maybe that's the beauty of it. But I guess, yeah, so let's talk a bit more about so diplomacy is the end goal. Um, but right now, Kyra just graduated high school and she's also doing stuff towards that. So what would you say like being a young diplomat or youth in diplomacy means to you right now? Like, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so a youth diplomat, in my personal opinion, is someone who embodies the traits of a diplomat, but they're a young student, they're a young professional. I mean, I see youth diplomat as anybody under 30, really. As you know, diplomats and ambassadors get their roles much later in life. So I'd say like under 30 is a good cutoff. And so when I say embody the trait, now the traits of a diplomat are pretty pretty, I'd say, numerous. It's like there's no question about it that you have to have a very round skill set. Curiosity is very important. Being well-rounded when it comes to knowledge. And so one of my mentors actually said, you need to know a little bit about a lot. And that really stuck with me. So you don't need to know everything about every single subject, but you just need to know enough to have a conversation with peers. And I mean, I think we'll get into it some more, but networking is also very important. And so a young diplomat in my definition is someone who works towards achieving those traits. So curiosity, knowledge, and yeah. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
This is really interesting because the last episode that I recorded with Julian was actually this topic of like, so we were talking about podcast recommendations and he recommended one that stuff called Stuff You Should Know. And essentially it's about like the way he explained it was like he knows now because of the podcast knows a bunch about everything so he can strike a conversation up with anyone, which is like a really interesting coincidence. But yeah, definitely important and I guess that leads us into networking. So one key point you brought up in our last call as well was that networking, you part of your efforts in networking were also in school. So typically, most students will focus on outside coffee chats with university students, coffee chats with people in their career path, coffee chats with potential employers or recruiting managers or this or that, but never at school because for some reason school just gets sidelined a bit. So could you introduce more a bit like why networking in school? How do you go about it?
I'd say I started networking near the end of my high school, so that'd be grade 12. I have never really networked within school because I personally find like a relatively small school. And so there wasn't much networking to do with new peers because a lot of the people I was graduating with I'd known since elementary. And to me, networking is the exchange of ideas, resources, and knowledge with new people in a certain field. And I find this to be a little bit difficult in high school since there's a broad range of interests and you might be interested in something niche that nobody else is. And so it's just about finding your people is what I would say. I would definitely encourage a networking like masterclass. I think that's something we were also talking about. It's important for youth to learn to network because you can get job opportunities, you can get connections, you get advice, often people who are in positions that hopefully you would like in the future. And so my advice to students looking to network would be to look at networking outside of academic settings. And so think of events, conferences, volunteering opportunities. I think that's really where you develop networking, because through high school, it's a little bit more difficult. Really, when you're put into an environment that you're uncomfortable and you walk into a room and you don't know anybody, that's when you really learn networking. Whereas when you walk into a classroom, you know all your classmates, you've been going to school with them for 7 years, it's I wouldn't really consider that networking, right? I mean, in your experience, how big was your high school?
I think we're close to a couple thousand people. I did not like school though, so I didn't really network in school. I will say that a lot of my collaborators now and people that I've worked with on passion projects, including my wonderful co-hosts for this podcast, Manazvi and Pranchi, are people that I've met through school. So I guess it's not all that bad. But I think there's a bit of a fear of getting judged, or generally school is not seen as a professional environment where most people are just cranky and trying to get through lessons, deadlines, and surviving tests, and barely socializing in the hallways in between. So I think it's a bit like a I don't think it's a conductive environment for networking. I've had some teachers and school staff that have been helpful, that I've had longer conversations with, that have been really, really insightful. But overall, I think school is a bit harder to network in, definitely. But I guess, yeah, you make the best of it, probably.
Yeah, and it's much easier, I find, to network with teachers versus peers. Because just
Mm.
teachers, the scale of knowledge, especially at high school, is drastically larger than your own. So it was always good to network with teachers, I find.
I also found a lot of the times that it was easier to network with teachers I've had before than my current teacher, because I don't know, maybe there's lower expectation because you're not just okay. No, there's a common practice in school of like you try to be friendly to the teacher to hopefully get like nicer marks and stuff. I wasn't really into that whole scheme. I didn't like if a conversation is fun, I'll just stay. But like I don't. It's not my kind of thing. So it was always like everyone was from class would always be around the teacher trying to optimize for better marks and such. So for me, that was like an iffy environment, and I tried to keep my distance. But then a lot of teachers I would connect with, or just drop by into their class before my classes or in my spare periods. So that was nice. But yeah, networking. I would also say networking is like you don't get it right the first time or the 10th time. It takes like a while to find your style and to be comfortable being yourself. It takes hundreds of interactions where you feel like, oh, I screwed that up before you actually start feeling like, oh my God, that was like, I nailed that. So it's a practice thing, but definitely it takes
Yeah, of
practice.
course. Practice is a good keyword. There's so many instances where something, like I say something, I'm like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have rephrased that differently, or maybe I should be using less filler words when I talk to these people. But I mean, there's some key fundamentals that I use when it comes to networking, in regards to how to approach people, body language, how to introduce myself. But apart from that, it's really, as I mentioned, you learn as you go. So the more experiences you have, I think it's really good. I mean, like any skills, the more you practice, the better you get at it. So I would
Yeah,
just
I'm
add that
also
to the conversation as well.
no, totally. I'm genuinely like my motto in life right now is like done better than perfect. Even for this podcast, I was editing one of the earlier episodes and I was like, oh, I'm my head is tilted, my this and that, and the headphones look uneven. This like my I use filler words a lot. I have to go back to reframe or restructure because my point is not clear or things like that. But I'm genuinely just trying to get into the mindset of like it doesn't feel good, growth doesn't feel good, but like I will look back on these days and smile at my silly old young self. So I'm just that's where it's at right now. But yeah, practice, practice,
Y- y-
practice.
Yeah, exactly. And there's countless situations that I've learned from, and I can directly quote situations like I know not to do this because I did this or at this situation or on this day. So like you learn from experience and then you know not to make those mistakes because it's different from you learning from experience and someone simply telling you don't do A, B, C, D, do, right? And so learning from experience, in my point of view, is the most valuable way to learn.
100%. And even when you get advice, it's hard to apply it, especially when it's practical, like socializing or networking. So I guess
Yeah.
like the advice is like little hints in your practice journey, but it's still like you have to do the heavy lifting of doing the thing, unfortunately, or also fortunately. Maybe that's the beauty of life. I
Yeah.
guess you mentioned you'd recommend a networking masterclass. So we have to talk about learning to network. Where do we get that skill from? Um, Obviously, schools do not teach it enough. I think that's established. School rarely teaches real life skills enough. But I guess, do you have any tips or any resources that have helped you? And how can we make networking less transactional and more meaningful? And how can we teach it?
Yeah, of course. I think when you can put students in a situation that A, they've never been in, B, they're uncomfortable in, but C, they're willing to learn in, I think those two principles are important in getting students out there. Part of networking is being with people you don't know. And so if there's any way that we can get students out there in those situations, that would be really helpful. I mean, networking with other high schools, if we can do events in a certain industry or within a certain field that forces students to interact with other students in a common subject or something they've researched about. I think that could be a really interesting proposition. When it comes to a masterclass, that could be a good base level for introducing students on the techniques when it comes to networking and give some advice. So I would do a masterclass 101 from amateur to pro, how to network for high school students 101, something along those lines to really teach high school students how to network. What would you add? I know you have some thoughts on that.
I mean, I think with these probably also need to start with some like socializing basics. I think our generation was truly hurt by COVID, and I think it took me a solid like
Yeah,
couple
a
of
good
years to
topic.
recover.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 2 3 years I was stunted socially because I needed like that. When you don't practice something, when you're stuck at home for 3 years, I was in Quebec at the time, so in 2020 we didn't go back to school at all because I was in secondaire, so there was no back to school. 2021, I think we spent like a good chunk of it at home as well when there was another outbreak in 2022, something like that. And then we spent a good chunk of time in grade 9 as well at home. And we also had very strict schedules, like special COVID schedules in grade 8 and 9 that also blocked a lot of extracurriculars and opportunities and to socialize. So it I lost a lot of time trying to just get back onto like normal social life. And then the networking aspect. But also, I think part of networking is it feels off, it feels cringe, it feels like you got used to it. Maybe. I don't think I disagree with a lot of networking tips out there.
Yeah, I mean, back to what you say about learning your own style. Like we can give students a handbook on how to network, but at the end of the day, they have to learn on their own. So it's kind of like a trick question. You can give them a master class, but it's up to them to learn. So back to my proposition about putting the students out there and force them to interact with other students from different high schools on a given topic. I think that'd be a better proposition than a master class. Going back to what you said about how to make networking less transactional, I would recommend that students connect and network with people that genuinely interest them. And so, I mean, everybody's human at the end of the day. And yeah, again, that'd be my advice to really make sincere connections because, like, humans can generally tell when you're not being sincere. And then another good piece of advice that I personally found has helped was that, to a certain extent, people like talking about their personal lives. So whether that's their kids, that's their pets, that's their travel, at the end of the day, we're all human. And to make it feel less transactional and more genuine, you want to have a genuine interest in the person, not just their career, right? You're not just using them for their connection and their expertise, but also for their wisdom in life. And I think that's a neglected aspect sometimes when it comes to networking.
I would maybe suggest running like literal experiments intentionally of like, oh, I'm gonna try this and that, and then like basically a process of reflect on past interactions, think about them, and then set like new milestones or approaches or tips for your next interactions. But I think, yeah, okay. I will also like to add that in when networking, sometimes it just doesn't like. Sometimes you won't
Sometimes
click
it
with
doesn't
people.
click.
Like it's
Yeah,
not
it
your fault.
happens.
It could be you're having a bad day. It could be the other person is having a bad day. It could be just like nothing is wrong and everything on paper is fine, but it just the vibe is not there. It's nobody's fault, and you can't click with everyone. If you were clicking with everyone, there's probably something wrong. Is what uh, if you're interacting with a ton of people and there's nobody to feel off with, it's like yeah, I don't know. It would be strange. I would also yeah also it feels cringe. It is cringe sometimes, and you see that this is the thing. I find a lot of networking tips like the people like talking with their personal lives kind of thing. It gets exploited sometimes. Like the 15-minute coffee chats of like the same students reaching out to the same professionals asking for the same coffee chats to ask the same questions. So what I found with myself is like life is too short to do that. So sometimes I'll genuinely reach out when I really want to have a chat, and I prefer or I prioritize long-term relationships. So rather than going through that awkward phase of pretending to care about someone's dog, for like new people, I prioritize someone that I genuinely click with, that I can have chat with multiple for a few hours at a time, and I learn a lot, and it's conversations that genuinely leave me thinking for days afterwards. I've been prioritizing that over like the 15-minute coffee chat. I don't like the 15-minute coffee chat concept, but yeah, I think it's generally about learning your style. You're right.
Yeah, of course. And like each their own, right? Coffee shares can be good, but again, I'd go back on making it less transactional, right? And showing a genuine interest in that person's life. Long term, I think is a good keyword to keep in mind when networking.
To be honest, I think the if I had to give like one go-to thing to make networking less transactional, you could probably just do that by networking when you don't need anything. Because a lot of the transactional aspect is, oh, I need a job, so I need to start networking so I get a job. But the point, if you did networking before you needed a job, because eventually you will need a job, in that leisure period where you're not actively looking for a job, you're in a space to genuinely interact with people. It's kind of natural to want things fast and subconsciously even to be pushy or feel transactional or not sincere. I so I think if you network when you didn't need something, you didn't have a particular ask of people, then that's where the real growth happens. And then you can leverage those networking skills, very polished networking skills for when you actually need something. And then I guess providing value and
Great point.
maybe some good karma, Also provide make time for other people as well. You want people to make time for you, people that you look up to, then there are probably people that look up to you as well. So be kind. So yeah, you done that. Um, yeah, I guess I did want to spend some time talking about the higher level thoughts on your thoughts on human science, the humanities and social sciences. So I guess we're going through a period where funding is getting, or we're in a world that prioritizes STEM in a lot of cases. And we see calls to cut humanities or social media trends mocking or making fun of certain fields. So, what do you have to say to that? Or, like, so what do you think social sciences can offer that's unique to the world's biggest problems? What are, like, in your perspective?
Yeah, good question. So STEM, I would argue, is a little bit more analytical and quantitative. When I think of STEM, I think of the mathematics and the economics. Whereas when I think of social sciences, humanities encompass mostly like geography, sociology, history, politics, psychology, anthropology, all those subjects. And so I would say that the STEM field offers us concrete data, whereas social sciences kind of allows us to analyze, I'd say analyze the data in a way that takes into account like human behavior. It allows us to offer unique perspectives on the world and really take a step back and not just look at the data, but look at like the why. And sometimes there's things that like slip up with STEM, right? So it's kind of a tough question. I would say that social sciences probably gives us the context and the human behavior behind every problem, right? And then you need a combination of both STEM and social sciences to attack a problem, right? When I'm making an argument, I need to back it up with data, and that's where I need the data. But if you like switch the roles, well, you need to be able to analyze data and all the different variants that may affect the data or explain it. That's kind of how I would answer the question. What would you add? Because I know you're going into STEM, you're going into tech, right, Lena? So
No, no, I think you put it really well. I don't really have anything to add to that. You've covered it really nicely. But yeah, I think fields are complementary and there should be intersectionality and collaboration rather than these ridiculous conversations about diminishing and undermining others' work.
that's a good way
So
to
I
put
guess
it. Yeah.
following up on that, if you could design your dream course, one that really doesn't exist yet, and what would you call it and what would it cover?
That's a good question. I haven't thought much about it. This is related to social sciences.
Or could be anything else. Up to you.
I can't think of anything that hasn't been taught yet. In today's world, I think, I mean, there's master classes of just about anything. There's TED Talks on just about anything. I wish there was more knowledge on body language and psychology. I think a mandatory psychology class in high school would be highly beneficial. I mean, learning about human behavior is like phenomenal for retrospection and just really reflecting on your own behavior as well and fosters empathy and compassion. And so I think anything really related to psychology or body language, behavioral sciences, I think that could be really important. Now, I can't offer you a specific class. I haven't thought that far, but if I do, I will let you know.
For sure. No, yeah, I think on that theme, I think a lot of I wish school would focus more on breadth over depth and let people choose their where they take the depth in to. Yeah, even within specific courses that are already offered, like English class, I wish there was more literature. The range of literature to explore was greater. I think we spent way too much time on communist Russia and the Soviet Union could have explored other parts of the world because it's not just North America and Europe and Russia. But yeah, I totally agree that in terms of practical skills, behavioral science, body language, I agree. And that also contributes to networking and just being well rounded individuals. I think, especially in the age of social media, we could really use that. I guess for our last and most exciting section, also my favorite. I'm gonna ask some shorter questions, and feel free to offer some shorter responses as well, more like a fireside, yeah, fire,
Good
fi-
shot, yeah.
yeah. Sorry, but I guess for the first question, we could you share one piece of advice you'd give first day of ninth grade, Kyra? What maybe about navigating identity, ambition, opportunity, life, friends, what would it be?
Yeah, of course. So I would say progress over perfection. I mean, you mentioned earlier getting it done over perfection. As a kid, I was definitely a perfectionist. There's no way about it. There's no question about it. when we went into our gymnastics locker room, we had a giant sign with a gymnast in the background that said, "Practice makes perfect." And then one of the more junior coaches mentioned how there was some flaws in that quote. And it was that, I mean, often perfect practice doesn't happen. The idea of practicing is that you fail, and when you fail, you're not exactly perfect, right? So I would say don't live by the quote, perfect practice makes perfect. I'd say progress over perfection. I'd really reframe that and think get stuff done, refine it after, and go from there. I mean, in ninth grade, a lot of them I see. I mean, when I was in ninth grade, I was a procrastinator, no doubt about it. I still, unfortunately, have some of those qualities as well. Something I'm working on. But yeah, progress over perfection. That's really what I'd recommend.
No, that's totally fair. I think I'm a huge procrastinator, but I've gotten better at procrastinating in the sense of like I can estimate if something is unrealistic for like the night before, so I'll start 2 nights before. So that's growth. But no, with the
Yeah, it is
quote
growth.
though, 100%. With the quote though, I find myself going back to a lot of the cringe or like the cliche quotes per se. The done over perfect. Oh, the one I was thinking about recently is like, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been going to those like cliche of the cliche type of quotes.
Mhm.
They work. They're cliche for a reason, is what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And
Um,
they're widely known for a reason because as cliche as they sound, they work. It's solid advice. Just apply it.
for sure. And sometimes it just needs, I know they're oversimplified, but sometimes when I'm bedrotting and I need some motivation, I don't need a complex philosophical lecture. I just need a little simple
Yeah,
quote.
no.
But yeah, I guess so. Now let's switch to older Kyra. In 5 years, what would Kyra be doing? And in 10 years, what would she be doing?
In 5 years, I see myself achieving a lot of the goals I currently set out for myself in my academic and my personal life. And I mean, I call myself a planner. I like to plan things, think ahead. And I'd say it's one of the qualities that's kind of helped me out so far. Yes, I could be better. I could be even more of a planner, but so far it's been really helpful. And so in terms of the 5 year mark, I'd like to reach all my goals. And then a 10-year mark, there's certain institutions and places I want to be. I like to travel, and ideally I'm not going to be in Canada in 10 years. I will probably be in Europe, but I mean anywhere else works as well. So I have a vision for a 2 year. I have a 2 year plan, a 5 year plan, a 10-year plan. I know where I want to be at the age of 50, 75. So it's really creating a plan and following those steps and being able to execute the plan to make sure that I get there in 5 and 10 years.
We should totally meet up for coffee in Paris or Berlin or wherever you'll be
Yeah,
at in 10 years. But
where,
sorry.
wherever you'll be at. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have to plan that. But I guess following up on that question, how do you balance being a planner and being spontaneous? I'm guessing sometimes like opportunities will come out of nowhere, or sometimes things get delayed, or sometimes things but there are new interests. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, that's a great question because it has come up where I've almost like over planned my week, for example, and an opportunity comes up and then it creates a conflict of schedule. When I was a multi-sport athlete, there's always conflict of schedule between both sports, and you're training 4 times a week for both sports, and it's only 8 days, 7 days a week, not 8 days. It creates conflict, right? So you do have to manage that, and leaving windows open for flexibility is always, I think, some good advice.
And how does Kyra rest when she's not practicing sports or not actively working towards her career? What are your me time activities?
I was saying as a kid, I loved to read, and I think it helped to develop my vocabulary. It's given me a step up from when I was a kid. When my training increased, I dropped that passion. I'd like to go pick it up again. pick up that hobby, it's something that I really think is important. A lot of intellects are readers. A lot of the smartest people in history are are intellects. They're scholars. They're readers, and so I think it's a important hobby to pick up for sure. Um, right now it's summer, so I have a lot more free time, and I'm just exploring other things, other productive hobbies.
Thank you for sharing. Next question. Okay, so our listeners might want something actionable to take away from this episode. So I guess if you could give a small but important thing, an action that someone could do in the next week to step out of their comfort zone and grow, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I would say figure out your weaknesses and see how you can improve on them, whether it's skills, goals, hobbies. Figure out where your weak points are, what areas of your life you want developed, and then execute a plan. Make sure you follow that plan to the T. And from there, you should be able to reach your goals. It takes a lot of introspection and a lot of self reflection, but at the end of the day, I think it's super worth it.
Logistically, how do you manage your planning? Is it like, do you do daily reviews, weekly, quarterly? What's the structure of the planning?
Currently, I'm at weekly, though it's fun to do, but I think weekly is really where it's kind of the sweet spot for me. Daily, you can. I know people take up journaling. I've never done that, but it's something I'm considering in the future. We'll see if it's something I'll pick up or not, but I definitely, as long as you keep track some way, somehow. I mean, personally, right now, I'm just using a Google Calendar to keep my schedule pretty organized. But I mean, as long as you find whatever works for you, I think that's what matters the most.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, you mentioned Google Calendar. Do you use, like, for goal setting, do you use paper, docs, Notion? What's the
And Notion's a pretty popular one, actually. So a lot of my friends recommend it, but I just use paper. I just feel like it's, if I can visually see my goal every day, I think it's accurate. Yeah. It's just, what do
as
you
a
use,
very
Lena?
as a very loyal Notion user, I've started writing on
Okay.
paper and taking pictures and uploading to
Yeah.
Notion because I find it more practical for I have like daily
Yeah.
everything. But yeah, no, paper is the best. Yeah, screens are good, but paper is on top always. I guess, okay, we're down to two questions. So if could you share briefly, maybe give me 7 words. Let's do that. 7 words that describe success and how you define it for yourself outside of medals, offers, grades, achievements. Seven. I'm counting down. Or no, you're free. If
I
you want to go over 7 words, go for it.
no, it's okay. Ambition, curiosity, intellect. I think whether you're in an academic setting or not, curiosity and intellect are kind of similar actually. But I think it's a good way to measure your success. How much do you know about a topic? It doesn't matter what it is, but knowledge I think is super important. So what do we say? Curiosity, ambition, knowledge, I have passion, perseverance, and back to resilience. And I'd say those are some key traits that are pretty important to achieve your success. And I mean, if you excel in developing those traits, I'm pretty sure you can achieve your goals without necessarily getting medals for them.
Would
What would
you?
you add, Lena?
No, I'm as long as I'm well slept, to be honest. No, okay. No, I think for me, as long as I'm not stagnant, that's what success is for me. I'm not, I plan, but I don't really like, I have goals, but I'm not too attached to them in the sense of like if I get too tired or burnt out or sick of what I'm doing, I'm just like, it's okay for me. Like I think I've made some good progress in the past couple of years of decentering my career from like my self-perception, I guess. Like, I still feel stressed about it, but if like it's not my like success for me is being well fed, growing every day, well slept, maybe, and with having cool friends and having cool conversations. That's where it's at for me.
Yeah, and
And
inch by inch, right? A little bit of progress every single day. Yeah.
yeah, 1% better. I don't know if we can get 1% better. I think 1% is too much. That's what bugs me about the
Yeah.
analogy. We can, I've spent like if you've spent like if it took you 20 years, 18 years to get where you are at today, you can't just become 1% better overnight. It's too much.
Yeah,
1% is
it's
like a
point
huge progress.
two, point one here. Like, yeah, of course. Progress is incredibly slow.
Yeah,
There's no question.
but yeah, I aim to hopefully make some improvement, something. Okay. So our listeners might also want some good intellectual content to consume. So if you could leave a recommendation for a book, a show, a podcast, a film, a content creator, a Substack newsletter, anything, what would you recommend?
So I imagine for most listeners, topics such as international relations or diplomacy could be interesting to them. And if so, I recommend you reach out to think tanks in your area. Obviously, listeners are around the world. So I'd recommend reading a lot of articles by think tanks, whether they're linked to your university, whether they're institutions or organizations. That's really where I would recommend to do some reading. And I mean, again, if it's reading or through podcasts, as long as you're actively reading and actively listening, I think that's what counts. I've been really trying to fight passive listening and passive reading because there's like content that I really want to understand, but I'm employing those forms of reading or listening. It's pretty harmful and, if anything, like time wasting, right? So choose a method in which you want to learn, whether that's reading or listening to podcasts, and devote yourself to really learning.
Is there an article or book that really, really stood out for you or like really changed how you see things that you could share as a starting point?
Yeah, so I read a book about a couple years ago, and it's regarding the athletic point of view. I'll find it for you actually. I haven't read it in a bit, but it is in my room. I will find it for you for sure, and I can send it to you or show it to you. Book really on athletic mindset. I think it can be applied in just about everyday life. I can't quote you one specifically, but I will send you the name of the one I have in mind. And so that's what's really shifted my perspective on sports, and I've applied it in other areas of life as well.
For the audience, you'll find the title in the description somewhere. I think it's gonna be on Spotify, I feel like. Yeah. Then it's on the
Yeah,
description.
sure. And like, for example, for everybody listening out there, if you're interested in learning languages, I definitely recommend just listening to a podcast in a language that you're hoping to learn, because it'll expose you to all the words, pronunciation, and really everything that's linked to language learning. So that's definitely something I'd recommend. And yeah, I hope that answers your question.
100%. Thank you so much for chatting with me, Kyra. Always a pleasure to speak with you. And yeah, I wish you the best. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. We'll definitely stay in touch, and best of luck with your podcast.
Thank you. Okay, done recording. Hi.